And for more reaction to the situation in Syria, we can now cross live to our correspondent, Ilya Petrenko. Ilya, over to you.
Marina, hi. Well, of course, the situation in Syria and most importantly in Aleppo is volatile. The international reaction is controversial. Right now with me, I've got two special guests who have just recently returned from the turbulent city of Aleppo. Right next to me is Mother Agnes Miriam, the igumen of St. James the Mutilated Monastery in Syria, and also independent investigative journalist Vanessa Beeley. She was last in Aleppo this August. So, Mother Agnes Miriam, let's just begin with you. You represent the Christian community in Syria, and of course it has been facing a major threat from the extremists that have flooded the country. Let's start with that. How bad is the situation at this point?
First of all, I don't represent, I am just a witness among the Christian family in Syria. The situation, of course, is a very bad situation. It's a tragedy for the civilian and for any person that is living in Syria, because there is no security. And this security does not exist because the international community is still financing and protecting the terrorists that are putting in threat this security. We have been visiting Aleppo because we are working in the humanitarian field and bringing humanitarian aid inside Aleppo. We have been targeted by snipers entering inside Aleppo. It means that the situation is still, as you say, volatile. And we are under the threat of hordes of terrorists. Now we don't know why the international community is gambling with the name. Sometimes Al-Qaeda changes her name, and it becomes a moderate rebel. And all this, you know, is threatening the life of millions of people. In Western Aleppo, you have 1.5 million of people. Most of them are coming from the eastern part, seeking refuge and security.
You mentioned sometimes the links between the rebel factions and also the former Nusra Front that is now known under a different name. So bearing in mind these kind of ties, what would happen to the Christian community in Syria if the opposition indeed ended up in power?
I don't think that the opposition will ever end up in power, because they are, first of all, totally divided among them. Second, they don't have if you want the power-wise to get in power. They don't have any administration. They have nothing during all these years. They
Well, sorry about this technical glitch there. We'll be trying to reconnect with our correspondent who was talking to Syrian non-mother Agnes Miriam, who campaigns for peace in Syria. Well, we might have a chance to go back to them and return to the conversation.
The barbaric acts of such a movement. Now we are very sad to say and to see that the majority of those rebels have joined with Jabhat al-Nusra, and many Western power and also Arabic power are helping Jabhat al-Nusra as being, we can say, the sole rebel power or movement to be strong enough to stand facing the Syrian Arabic army.
Well, if we just go to the situation in Aleppo and how it's being covered in the media, I'd just like to ask Vanessa a question. So, the plight of civilians in western Aleppo, where in fact there are more civilians currently than in the east, is widely underreported by the Western media that is mainly focusing on the tragedies in eastern Aleppo. Why is that happening, do you think?
Fundamentally because it serves the NATO state coalition propaganda. From the very beginning, the story of Aleppo, if you like, has been the tale of two cities, West Aleppo and East Aleppo. Eastern Aleppo in 2012 was invaded by armed militant factions that then transformed themselves into the various 22 terrorist brigades that now occupy this area, which is probably only 25% of the whole of Aleppo city. 75% is Western Aleppo that contains 1.5 million, maybe even more now, with the exodus from East Aleppo into the safety of the government-held West Aleppo. You're quite right in saying that West Aleppo, despite the fact that it contains the majority of the civilians of Aleppo, is largely ignored. When I entered Aleppo on the 14th of August, we were told that in a very short 2-week period, 54 children had been killed by the terrorists' hell cannon mortar fire. They packed gas canisters, water heaters, any form of containers they can find, with explosives, nails, shrapnel, glass. And these are fired in multiple missions into West Aleppo, into largely civilian-held areas. The civilian-held areas are sniped on a daily basis also to try and drive civilians out of the border areas between West and East, so that the terrorists can encroach further into West Aleppo. The West Aleppo plight is generally ignored because it doesn't serve the Western media propaganda, because they want to portray the image of the moderate rebel, which we know now even from the United Defense Department is largely a myth. But they want to propagate this myth of the moderate rebel instead of the terrorist factions that are massacring on a daily basis with the rains of missile and mortar fire into the West Aleppo civilian areas.
Well, I understand your explanation for at least the media, but if we talk about humanitarian NGOs, aid organizations, why do they have a different approach when it comes to looking at the situation in the East versus the situation in the West?
Well, this is a very interesting question again. If we look at who is producing the propaganda from East Aleppo, it's a number of organizations and individuals, the majority of whom are funded by the West, like, for example, Aleppo Media Center, that is largely funded by the French Foreign Ministry. And then, of course, we come to the White Helmets. The White Helmets are the majority propaganda producers in East Aleppo. In fact, throughout the corridor from East Aleppo up to Idlib and into Turkey. And they claim to be an impartial, neutral NGO. They are, in fact, multi-million funded by the United States, by the UK Foreign Office, by Japan, Denmark, Germany, Holland, and France. And in fact, we saw them recently being entertained as heroes in the Assemblée Nationale in Paris. This organization was formed by a British mercenary, James Le Mesurier, in 2013. They are trained by him. He has a background in private security work, including connections back to Blackwater, which is one of the best-known mercenary private security firms that was used by the CIA, both under Bush's regime and under Obama's regime, as an outreach assassination organization for the CIA. So his connections go back to these type of security firms. He is the trainer of the White Helmets. They're not trained in Syria. They're trained in Gaziantep in Turkey, and they are then implanted into areas like East Aleppo, areas that are under heavy conflict or are target areas for the NATO proxy forces inside Syria. From all of the information that we've received, they are acting as terrorist support groups. Terrorist support groups in the sense of bringing equipment, arms, funding even into Syria. And when I spoke to the real Syria civil defense inside West Aleppo, that has been in existence since 1953. It's the only Syria civil defense organization that is registered with the ICDO, the International Civil Defense Organization, which has affiliation with the United Nations, WHO, OCHA, Red Crescent, and Red Cross. They told us that in 2012, when the various militant factions invaded East Aleppo, they drove out the real Syria civil defense crew. They massacred many, they kidnapped others, they stole equipment, including all of their ambulances and 3 of their fire engines. One of the crew members managed to escape to West Aleppo, and it was him that told us about this process that went on. What he also told us was that the White Helmets grew out of these militant factions that invaded in 2012. He went further to say that the White Helmets do no humanitarian work. They're very poorly trained in paramedic work, and if you watch any of the videos, that becomes very obvious that they have no paramedic training. He claimed that they drive around with guns in the back of their car like every other terrorist there. They carry out and facilitate criminal activities in eastern Aleppo.
And there's evidence of that, photographic.
Yeah. Definitely. There's extensive video evidence of their participation in terrorist activities.
In that kind of situation, how come is there such a contrast between reality and the image that's being portrayed by the media when it comes to the White Helmets?
Again, the White Helmets has been produced as a construct, one, to eradicate the Syrian state institutions. So in other words, it's fraudulently masquerading as the Syria civil defense, because there is an existing Syria civil defense that is operating in both terrorist and government-held areas, rescuing people from every sort of attack that's going on inside Syria. This organization is a fraudulent shadow state construct created by NATO to simply propagate the propaganda that will demonize Assad's government and also demonize Russian legal intervention in Syria.
Mother Agnes Miriam, you're running your own humanitarian campaign in Syria. Why are we not hearing about that campaign in the media?
Well, those media that are the mainstream media, they don't care about what is really happening on the ground. What they care about is to produce things that are more in harmony with their policies, and they can orient it's a brainwashing. They can orient the public opinion toward what they would like people to believe. So in these mainstream media, they demonize us. We are demonized. If we work on reconciliation, we are demonized. If we try to help people to enter in besieged areas, we are demonized. If we give our life for anyone, because we deal with everybody, even with rebels, you know, and with the family of the rebels. Between brackets, I can tell you that I have been nominated as the spokesperson for the Free Red Crescent, which is not recognized by the Red Crescent nor by the Red Cross. But I mean that the rebels from the Free Syrian Army, they have esteem for what I might give them as security or as counseling or also as humanitarian help. But the mainstream media and those who are standing behind them, they don't care about any good we are doing. They always try to translate what we are doing in politics words and frame us as in the way they would like. And you know, it's after so many years, it's a real scandal.
Mother Agnes, thank you very much for your thoughts. It's always great to hear from someone who actually spend a lot of time helping people in these war-torn areas. Right next to me, it was Mother Agnes Miriam, who is the Igumant of St. James, the mutilated monastery in Syria, just several dozens of kilometers north of Damascus. She returned from Aleppo 6 days ago, and also independent journalist who's investigating things that are happening in Aleppo, Vanessa Beeley. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Arti.
Back to you, Marina.
Ilya, thanks very much for bringing us the viewpoints that are not widely reported in mainstream media. Our correspondent Ilya Petrenko there. And news continues at the top of the hour. Do stay with us here on RT International.